Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm going to show you the top 5 ways to save money at a Powersports dealership. I just spent the last year and a half as a service manager at one of these places, so some of these tips are very real world and will absolutely help you out. Okay, so we're out in my very tiny little garage and also very stuffed with Powersports items. I am personally have been obsessed with Powersports stuff since I was basically old enough to walk. The vast majority of my life has tragically been very devoid of these type of toys, but here we are now. As I mentioned, I just spent the last year and a half working at a Powersports dealer, and I was the service manager. You get called all the time. Somebody has a problem, you have to help sort of figure out what it is and send it off to the mechanics to get fixed, and we just see the same things over and over and over. So let's start jumping into it. All right, so tip number 1, just constantly this issue would come up. Winter is over, springtime's coming, and somebody is calling and saying, I'm trying to start my quad or my dirt bike or street bike or whatever, and I just hear a click, click, click. Batteries for Powersports stuff, the failure rate, like they theoretically could last 5 or 6 years or whatever. Average lifespan is probably more like 2 years because they sit in a garage or a cold shed over the winter. They go completely dead. Maybe you can charge it up and it'll have a little bit of life left. Sometimes you get lucky. But typically speaking, batteries die prematurely all the time just from not being looked after. So it's so easy. Get a battery tender, hook it up, and maybe you could pull the battery out if you're a little bit mechanical. Bring it inside somewhere warm for the winter. Don't store it on concrete. That's not good for them. But that is just the easiest way to avoid buying a new battery every couple of years. Battery tenders, use them. Okay, the next topic we're going to talk about is carbureted vehicles. I would get calls all the time. This quad or this dirt bike or whatever has been sitting, for a couple years or 6 months or whatever it is, and it'll start, but it won't idle. It'll run with the choke on, but it won't idle. And it's always the same thing. The pilot jet gets plugged. Modern gas just cannot sit in a carburetor for long periods of time. You're going to have problems with it. For some reason, fuel-injected stuff seems to get away with it, but these carbureted vehicles is very problematic with modern gas. So if you're going to be parking something for the winter or for longer or whatever, you could put some fuel stabilizer in there, mix it up good, make sure you run it enough that it's actually getting in the carburetor and fill in the float bowl. Another thing you could do would be to just turn the fuel petcock off and run it out. That should get most of the gas out of the carb. Either way, it just happens over and over and over again. A vehicle that's carbureted, sitting with modern gas in it for months or years on end is going to be a problem when you go to start it up. All right, next up is talking about extended warranties. There are a lot of different categories and segments within the Powersports world. You've got snowmobiles and personal watercraft and motocross bikes and all sorts of different things. By and large, most Japanese modern street bikes are extremely reliable. There are things that come up, and a lot of it's service stuff like doing fork seals or, so on and so forth. But things like personal watercraft and snowmobiles especially, as well as side-by-sides, that can be really expensive to repair. There are some situations where you might be able to get a warranty for something, and maybe it comes with 2 or 3 years, and then you can get another couple-year extended warranty on top of that. The amount of times I've handed somebody a bill for a snowmobile repair that was in the thousands of dollars, couple grand, $1,000 here and there, 4 or 5 grand if a motor goes, maybe more sometimes. I've seen personal watercraft where an engine let go, and especially some of the big supercharged units, it can easily get up into the $6,000-8,000 to repair. Not to say that it happens all the time. The other thing is UTVs. Often there's a lot of work to get in at the motor. Sometimes there's just a ton of time to get the seats apart and get in underneath all the floorboards and all that kind of stuff. The shop rate nowadays is insane. I mean, it can fluctuate. The town I live in is between $140 to $220 an hour. 10 hours goes by or whatever, I mean, it adds up quick. So I would seriously consider aftermarket warranties. They are absolutely worth their weight in gold. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is getting tire changes. We all have to deal with it all the time. A lot of dirt bikers change their own, although honestly, we used to have people come in all the time that tried to do it themselves, got a pinch flat, wasted half the day, and ended up just saying the heck with it. One thing you can do to save money is to just bring in the rims themselves. A lot of dealers, I would imagine, we definitely had a discounted rate for that. If it was on the bike, it would generally be about a half an hour of labor as kind of a flat charge. And if it was just a rim, it would be about 15 minutes. So definitely you're cutting your thing basically in half. And with something as expensive as labor, that is a good way to go. There is one caveat with that though. On something like this bike here, you know, it's hard to stabilize these bikes. There are certain like lift things that, you know, lug onto there and you can sort of flip it under and it'll lift the bike up. If you have something like that, great. But, you know, if you can't secure the bike and stabilize it, I wouldn't bother. But if you can, pretty easy way to save some money. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is stators. It's a very common thing for a motorcycle, ATV, whatever, to need a stator at some point in its life. Almost immediately after I bought this quad, I had to put a new stator in it. I was shocked that they wanted $500 for a new one. In this particular example, I found somebody online that parted out Can-Ams, and I think I bought one for like around $50 to $70. But that was a used one. You're definitely rolling the dice. I'm pretty mechanical, so I just figured whatever, I'll give it a shot. However, there are other ways to save some money. There's a place here in Canada called RM Stator. I imagine they sell to the States, and there's probably other comparable companies out there. But for stators and regulator rectifiers and possibly other stuff, it would be probably about a third of a price to replace the stator, which really is pretty substantial. It's very common that they're $500 or $600 or so for different vehicles, and often you would get one from there for a couple hundred. We always would recommend that to people just to save some money. We had great experiences with that particular company, and I'm sure there are other ones out there. I would be careful, just some random thing off eBay or whatever, but saving money on a stator specifically and regulator rectifiers is pretty easy to do with something like that. Okay, we've talked about the top 5 ways to save money at a Powersports dealer. This last one's kind of a bonus one, and this applies to people like me. This is a 2003 WR450. This is a 21-year-old high-performance dirt bike. As you can see, this thing has been through the ringer. It's a complete and utter pile, but it still just runs great, so I'm going to keep on riding it. We would get calls from people like this all the time saying, I've got a 2007 KTM or a 2004 Honda or this or that or whatever, and they say, I need a new bottom end. And I don't think people realize, and I know for sure they don't realize, just how expensive it is to get that kind of work done at a dealer. A lot of times, once you're getting in there, your cylinder might be out of spec or scratched up or whatever. It ends up being gigantic bills to the point where it is not really feasible to fix the bike. It's just not worth it. So, you know, you try and tell somebody it's going to be, you know, between $2,000 and $4,000 to repair this old bike that's probably got crappy swing arm linkage and probably needs wheel bearings and blah, 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 on and on and on. So the one tip I would say is to just maybe learn how to do some of this stuff yourself. Shop rate is insanely expensive, and you really need to know that going in. This bike here, I know that when I got it, they had put a new big bore kit and a top end in it. I think this bike actually has pretty low hours, which is surprising how rough it is. But I mean, you look at the seat, it just doesn't seem like this thing has had hundreds and hundreds of hours, but I could be wrong. But anyways, I'm going to be, you know, in that same position where, you know, eventually this thing will start making weird noises and I got to decide, am I going to part it out or fix it up? Luckily with me, I am very mechanical. I'm a million miles from a professional, but I am not afraid of sort of jumping in and just learning all this stuff. And that's the only way that you can keep a lot of these old bikes going, because like I said, it just doesn't make sense. There's no way I could just throw $4,000 at this bike when I've only paid $2,300 for it, you know, a year and a half ago, and beat the ever-loving snot out of it every day I've owned it. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of this video. Those are my top 5 ways to save money at a Powersports dealership. If you have any other ones, please feel free to drop them in the comments. Give me a thumbs up and a subscribe, and we will see you on the next one.